Münster and Osnabrück were strange places to call an international peace conference. Larger cities, some of them accustomed to hosting major gatherings such as the Imperial Diet, Frankfurt, Nuremberg, Cologne, and Lübeck, were passed over in favor of two provincial towns of no special importance. Contemporaries viewed it something like we might if the president announced a major forthcoming conference in the Iowa cities of Cedar Rapids and Davenport. To be sure, treaties have been negotiated in small towns even in recent times. The Treaty of Portsmouth, ending the Russo-Japanese War, was signed in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and the General Framework Agreement for Peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina was signed in 1995 in Dayton, Ohio. Negotiators had their reasons for choosing smaller or less cosmopolitan cities in those cases, chiefly security and, in the case of Dayton, relative isolation from the international press. Neither of those played a role in the selection of Münster and Osnabrück, however. Instead, they were picked mainly because of their location, which had to be close to the United Provinces, or else the Dutch would not attend, but otherwise centrally positioned. They do represent a fair compromise for delegations from Madrid and Stockholm, along with Rome, Paris, and Vienna. Moreover, since two separate cities were required to avoid precedence disputes between France and Sweden, they needed to be close together for ease of communication. They are about 30 miles apart. And since Sweden was a Lutheran state, it wanted to negotiate in a Lutheran city. The more likely choices were therefore passed over for these two inconspicuous towns, which served key diplomatic requirements. Whatever political advantages the locations possessed, however, were outweighed in the minds of the diplomats by the sense that they were being exiled in the middle of nowhere. Münster behind the pigsty, Trautmannsdorf addressed his first letter back to Vienna, and a Frenchman referred to it as Pigtown. Davot's priest Ogier was in culture shock. Westphalia, he wrote, is the image of ancient Germany, heathen, disagreeable, and full of bogs. The area really was a vital center of heathen Germany. It was there, a little over 10 miles from Osnabrück, that a German army under Arminius had destroyed 3 Roman legions under Quintilius Varus in AD 9 in the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. In Rome, Emperor Augustus reportedly responded to the news by banging his head against a wall and crying out, "Varus, give me back my legions!" In Germany, it meant the end of Rome's attempts to expand east of the Rhine. When the Roman Empire became Christian, Westphalia was still beyond its borders and retained its heathen heritage until Charlemagne invaded in the 8th century A.D. He found the local Saxons worshipping at a huge oak tree, the great pillar that they called Irminsul, which he cut down and forcibly Christianized the region. Ogier, a classically educated scholar, probably thought of this history when he confronted the drastically different culture of the north. It may have seemed to him that the echoes of dying Roman legionaries haunted the landscape. In reality, of course, the region had been Christianized for nearly 1,000 years by the time of the Congress of Westphalia. In fact, the very name Münster means cathedral in German. It was one of the last Catholic strongholds in North Germany. Until 1648, it was best known as the site of an Anabaptist revolution that occurred in 1534. After migrating from the Netherlands, 2 recent Anabaptist converts took over the government of the city, burned all books except the Bible, introduced shared property, and authorized polygamy. Their short reign ended the next year when the town's bishop took it in a siege. The surviving leaders were tortured, executed, and their bodies displayed in cages hanging high from the steeple of St. Lambert's Church. The cages were still there in the 1640s, as they are even today. The prevailing sense of visitors during the Congress of Westphalia, however, was not one of religious conflict between pagans and Christians or Catholics and Protestants, but rather of unrefined, albeit comfortable, bourgeois living. Westphalia is known for its hams and its distinctive pumpernickel bread, which was allegedly named by Napoleon, who declared that it was fit only for his horse. The French probably had a similar view of the bread and other local foods during the negotiations, and Davot, who is the most familiar with Germany, wrote that they are coarse in this country, and it has been necessary to civilize them. They did their best, however, to seem appreciative of the hospitality. A French priest wrote a ballet, really something like a play, performed in Münster in 1645, in which he tactfully emphasized the good points of the region. Although France and Italy are the countries of beautiful women, We prefer the simplicity of the ladies of Westphalia. This was, to continue the comparison with Iowa, the German heartland, full of honest, hard-working people, but not the kind of elite crowd to which the representatives were accustomed. Adding to the discomforts of a provincial town was the bad weather. Peñaranda deplored the weather frequently in his correspondence, and once stayed in his room for 19 days in a row rather than face the hostile climate. He commented that August in Münster was as cold as October in Spain. Münster was undoubtedly colder than most delegates, except the Swedes, were used to. It snowed as late as May and as early as October, and the months in between were not always warm. The biggest complaint, however, was not the cold, but the seemingly endless rain. Today, Münsteraners joke about their town: either it rains or the church bells ring, and if both occur at the same time, it's Sunday. In truth, Münster receives no more rain than most other German towns, but it falls in a seemingly endless drizzle from a cloudy sky. Westphalian women wore a distinctive headdress, the Falkenhaube, which may have served in part to protect against the rain. Kiji, from the sunny Mediterranean, found it particularly hard to adjust to the weather. He wrote a lengthy satirical poem on the rains of Münster to comfort his damp spirits. A lot of rain, of course, meant a lot of mud, which exacerbated the town's unrefined appearance. A member of the French delegation recorded his first impressions of this filthy town of Münster as wet and muddy as it could possibly be. It didn't help that the narrow, crooked roads were poorly paved and had gutters running down the middle. Although most representatives could afford to ride on official visits, avoiding the worst of the filth, the roads took a considerable toll on their carriages, as two Bavarian representatives discovered to their chagrin during one trip when it collapsed beneath them. People stabled livestock of all sorts in their houses. At dawn, with the sounding of the shepherd's horn, they would let the animals out into the streets, leaving them to find their own way home before dark. At night, it was the pigs' turn to run free in the streets, which they kept clean of garbage while strongly deterring would-be burglars. Despite these practical advantages, one imagines that the squealing packs of swine roaming the town at night disconcerted those visitors used to a less provincial setting. It was a heck of a place to hold a peace conference.